All right, man. Hey, I'm super proud to be here with you guys today and to be amongst such incredible speakers. If you pay attention, the common thread amongst all the speakers today is not our stories, but the story of Christ in our lives. And that's what I'm here to share this morning with you. I want to start off at a time in Afghanistan, because I know maybe you're getting a little tired. It's been long, so everyone could get maybe fired up with the war story. Right, so I had a really unique opportunity in the military. I was, as Frank said, I was a Force Reconnaissance Marine, which is Special Operations in the Marine Corps. We have some Marines in here? All right. And, I got really, even beyond that, I got a unique chance to serve as part of a JSOC task force. For those not in the military, JSOC is Joint Special Operations Command, and it's really the premier opportunity to serve at the highest level of special operations. So it was a great opportunity. I did eight deployments in that capacity, all to Afghanistan. And my job was a little bit different in the fact that you might picture being in the military in like military uniforms, big convoys of a big team. I was an advanced force operator, which meant I worked in a clandestine capacity. So civilian clothes, working with local nationals, with local Afghans. This particular day I want to tell you about, I was with one other team member. He was a Navy SEAL, and the two of us were in civilian clothes. We each had a pistol kind of hidden in our waistband, and we were in a Toyota Prada, which is like a Toyota 4Runner, a civilian vehicle. And we're driving on a road called Jalalabad Road, heading into the eastern side of the capital city of Afghanistan. The city's name's Kabul. And as we were driving on Jalalabad Road, I looked in my rearview mirror, and I saw a Hilux pickup truck, which was loaded with guys that looked like the Taliban. They had big beards, tribal clothing on. They were dusty. We've seen some AK-47 assault rifles. We even seen one RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. And these guys looked like they were up to no good, and there was a lot of them. We had a joke, how many Taliban can you fit in a Hilux pickup truck? So the answer is one more. Right? They're piled in this truck, and we're like, man, I hope they're not following us. And so I did a technique I learned in my training called deviating your route. So I'm on Jalalabad Road, and I made a right off of the main course, and I started making a block, and they continued to follow me. When I got back to my original route and turned right again, they turned and followed me, which confirmed to me that they were, in fact, following me. It also let them know that I knew they were following me, which started a chase. These guys started pursuing us pretty aggressively, and I made a decision. Instead of going out of the city, I thought I could lose them in the city, because I didn't live on a base anywhere. I lived in Kabul. I had a house there at the time, and I knew the city really well, and I thought I could lose them. Now, if you think the traffic here is bad, which it is, it has nothing on third world traffic. No stoplights, no street signs. Like the traffic in Kabul is terrible. You know, thousands of people in there trying to get through with cars. And I started having a difficult time getting away from these guys. I was banging into some cars trying to lose them. And I got this major intersection called Masood Circle. And as I got to Masood Circle, the traffic began to just congest and began to stop. And as the traffic began to stop, I had to stop my vehicle. And somehow this truck full of Taliban guys got around the front of us, cut us off. I remember a few guys jumped out the back. My most vivid memory is the passenger door opening. The guy stepped out. He was clearly in charge. He has AK-47 in one hand. His other hand, he gave me a hand signal to stop my vehicle. A really bad situation. In my training experience, this is called being stuck on the X. Right? The X is the ambush site. It's a kill zone. A couple of rules you learn in training about the X is, number one, you have to be able to recognize that you're on the X. You got to know you're in a bad situation. Number two, you have to get off the X, right? You can't stay there. You have to move or something bad's going to happen. And so I'm so thankful for military training. I had trained for this scenario before, knew exactly what to do. I hit my guys and I aimed my vehicle towards theirs to execute a ramming technique. Probably my most favorite memory of Afghanistan is when I smashed in that truck, seeing those little Taliban guys fly out through the air, and that truck spun out the way, and we made it off that intersection and on the safety. Guys, I'm here today to tell you that you don't have to go to Iraq or Afghanistan to find yourself on the X. Right? Every one of you in this room can think of a time that they were on the X in their life, and maybe some of you are on it today. We come to points in our life, and I learned through my own life and through the ministry I do, working with so many thousands of other combat veterans suffering with suicide and post-traumatic stress and all these things we deal with in the ministry I do, that it really comes down to one thing, and that's a choice. A choice that we have to make to decide if we want to stay in the X's in our life and die, either literally or metaphorically, or if we're going to get off the X and move forward in the very lives that we were created to live. You know, God didn't just create you, but He created you with a plan and purpose for your life. Isn't that amazing? Each and every person in here, God created with a specific plan and purpose for your life. Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you, not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." It's not just a plan, it's a good plan. But we have to make the choice to step off those X's in our life and move into the very lives he intended us to live in. Now, I wish I could say that I always did that I always knew God's promise for my life or made the choice to get off the X in my life. I think I did it good as a professional in Afghanistan, place like Afghanistan. That's one of many stories where I had to get off that X and press forward and survive in combat. But I can't say that I always did it well in my personal life. And my hardships in my life did not start in Afghanistan. I'm from a 3-generation Marine Corps family. My son Hunter is the newest. He's a Marine, 3rd-generation Marine in Afghanistan right now. In fact, I'm waiting. Yeah, thank you. You guys can be praying for him, please, because actually right now, as I'm standing right here, he's out on patrol outside in patrol with the Georgians somewhere in Afghanistan right now. I know that because he sent me a message this morning, and I hadn't heard back from him yet. So he's the newest. It was me in Afghanistan, eight deployments. My father was a Marine also, and he was a Marine in Vietnam. And when he came home, I'm sure he struggled with a lot of the same things many of our warriors struggle with today. And if anybody's any Vietnam veterans in here, or anybody in here had a Vietnam veteran father, you know what I'm talking about. Some real struggles coming home at a time when we didn't have the help and support from our nation that we have today for our warriors. And I'm so thankful to our Vietnam veterans who endured that, because America learned a lesson and we were able to care for our warriors better today. My father didn't. If help was available for him, he didn't get it. And I grew up in that angry, dysfunctional home. He was not only an alcoholic, but a very violent man. And so I don't mean, when I say child abuse, I don't mean getting spanked with a belt. I mean fist to face when we were children, abuse to me and my brother. My brother was really close to me. Anybody that's grown up in a dysfunctional home, you know the siblings get very, very close. And so me and my brother we would talk about joining the military when we got older and escaping that life. When we were 13 and 14 years old, in fact, we kind of hatched a plan of escaping that life to join the military. We didn't, while we didn't look up to my dad, the one thing my dad always had that he was proud of was the fact that he was a United States Marine. And so that kind of put something inside of me that I wanted to be a Marine, despite who he was. And so we were 13 and 14 years old. We started running and swimming, and we wanted to be in some kind of special operations. We grew up in southern Louisiana, so we loved the water, loved to swim. And so we kind of dreamed about that. About a year into that, tragedy hit our family. My brother, he was shot and killed. And I went into really deep isolation. What I had left of the family broke apart. My mother had really lost her mind. My father didn't want to deal with it, so he left. And so at a very young age, I found myself living alone with an older sister, trying to figure it out in this very deep isolation. But I never lost sight on that goal to join the military. And when I was 17 years old, 1993, I had the opportunity to join the United States Marine Corps, and I embraced every moment of it. It was like a brand new chance of life for me, a total clean slate, and I totally embraced it. I wanted to be in that special operations field. So that first year, I tried out to be a recon Marine, and I made it, which is not easy to do, especially at a young age. I mean, their attrition rate is up to 80% for that job. When you're that young, it's very hard to make it, and I did. And I'm so thankful for that opportunity, because not only did I have amazing men and mentors step in and teach me how to be a recon Marine, but also how to be an adult, how to be a man, and how to grow up. And so I really embraced that at a time in my life. But I had this longing and desire to go to combat and go and do my job. I'm not like a warmonger or anything, but I mean, when you train and train and train to do something, you want to go do it. And sadly, it came at the cost of 9/11. I remember watching those planes flying those World Trade Center buildings on television, and many people in this room remember that. I remember watching that with my wife. I was assigned to 3rd Force Recon Company at the time, and I knew my life was going to be different. I knew that the world wasn't going to be the same, and my life wasn't going to be the same. And I and everybody I knew in the military were not like, oh my gosh, we're going to war. Everyone was showing up with their commands, like, hey, what's up, sir? Like, when we going to do this? And we wanted to deploy. And like I said, I got exactly what I asked for. I was accepted on this JSOC task force. And through 8 deployments, I'll forever be grateful to be able to serve in that capacity. But if you had asked me at the time if I was ready, I would have said absolutely. Military talks about resiliency, mind, body, spirit, social, being mentally tough, physically tough, being in a social brotherhood, being a strong brotherhood connection, having a spiritual foundation. I thought I had all those things checked. When it came to physical fitness, I was physically fit, mentally tough, motivated to do my job. I was in the best team and support network I could possibly be in. And the word spirituality, like I had the word Christian stamped on my dog tag, so I was good to go. But to be honest with you, I had no idea what that meant. I would have said I was a Christian at the time. I took my wife and children to church every Sunday. But if I could be honest looking back, the reason I probably brought my wife to church is because it was more manipulation and control. Like, she's going to come to church, she's going to be like faithful and loyal and a virtuous woman, everything we get out of it. My kids are going to go to Sunday school, and they get discipline and character, and I got to beat them so much, right? They get everything that I wanted to get out of the church, I was going to get out of it, but I wasn't going to play softball with those nerds on Wednesday night. Like, that was my mentality. I believed, and I think many men probably share this in here, I believed that Christian men were weak. That was my mindset. I believe, and maybe it was demonstrated that way for me, but somehow I believe that I had to choose between masculinity and Christianity. That I had to choose between being a warrior and being a man of God because I thought that faith was weak. Let me tell you firsthand from the battlefield, there is no more strong of a man on the battlefield of Afghanistan or the battlefield of life than men of God. If not for men of God, who will stand up and fight for what needs to be fought for? And that's why I'm so just moved that so many men would be here today on a Saturday, stepping up and being intentional about being men of God, because this world, if you haven't noticed, needs men of God to stand up, because this world is a man crisis right now. And I'm thankful for you to be here. I wish that I would have knew that, because I believe I made a deliberate decision to put my faith on a shelf and say I could do that when I get older. I don't have a place for this right now. I need to be a warrior. I believe I made a deliberate decision to do that, and it almost cost me everything. I took God out of my life, and it left a giant hole inside of me that over the following years, I would fill with hate and rage and anger and bitterness. I didn't live on a base. I lived in town, and my first exposure of being embedded with the Afghans were to live in their homes and eat dinner with their families and play soccer with their kids. And I began to learn about who the enemy was, who the Taliban was, and what they had done, and the disgusting atrocities that they'd done to the Afghan people, the sexual molestation of women and children, and just the things that they did, the torture and different things they would do to these people. And I went from wanting to retaliate for 9/11 as a patriot to wanting to help these people that couldn't help themselves. And a darkness began to take over me, and everyone I worked with felt the same way. We had this kind of Viking mentality, war culture mentality, and all the guys on my team felt that way. The people that probably hated the Taliban the most and was the most driven were the Afghans, because they had suffered it the most personally. And I really bought into that, and it worked really well in Afghanistan. To have intensity, to have that kind of drivenness in a combat environment works really well. But where it doesn't work well is 24 hours later when you're back home, and you have to be a husband and a father and Mr. Rogers, a friendly neighbor. Like, I couldn't flip that switch, guys. I was still an angry, intense dude. And I'm ashamed to say, every time I share this, I'm ashamed to say that my home was not a happy place to be. My wife and children were scared of me. If I didn't get my way, I'd throw temper tantrums like a 15-year-old child. I'd slam doors, punch holes in the walls, break things, scream at my children and my wife like I was a Marine Corps drill instructor. I was tormenting them. It was not a happy place to be in my home. And one of the things that one of the moments that I could recall that probably made it the most clear to me that I was out of control was I made it home for my little girl's birthday. And she's very opinionated. She still is. That's just who she is. And she didn't like the icing on her cake. Something so simple. And I just lost it. I flipped out. I grabbed a handful of my little girl's birthday cake, picked up her cake and threw it against the wall, destroyed my little girl's birthday in front of everyone. I remember in that moment, like, knowing I was out of control, but like if I would have stopped, it was like an admission of guilt. And so I wasn't going to back down. I would just dig my heels in those moments. And when I began to recognize that these moments were more often than not, I started, instead of changing those behaviors, I started to isolate myself from my family. I could just distance myself, stay as busy as I could. Anything I could volunteer for between deployments, I would volunteer for. My wife was such an amazing, like, mother and father and husband and wife. She kind of handled everything, so I was able to just lean on her and really take advantage of that. And over time, that anger started to manifest in these physiological symptoms, something I never thought would happen to me. My arms would go numb. My face would go numb. I'd feel like my throat was swelling shut. I'd be on operations and more intense operations, and I'd have what's called disassociation, where my mind almost felt like left your body in like a video game, having a bird's eye view of yourself. There were operations I'd go on, and I'd come back, and I couldn't remember like the last hours and then days, and it began to progress and get much, much worse. I didn't want to tell anyone that I worked with, because I worked in this little special operations community. I thought the guys would think I was weak, and so I just tried to push it down and keep doing my job. Only it didn't help. The symptoms got much worse. Towards the end of my deployments, I had 12 guys that worked for me, 12 Afghans that worked for me, and we went into an operation where we went two different directions. and they were missing for about a week. And then we later learned that they were captured, and all of them were killed. And you may think, well, they weren't fellow Marines. You know, they're Afghans. These guys were my brothers. Like, I lived with them for 3 years. I would have died for those guys, and they would have died for me. And I was responsible for them. I took it really hard. I started having this very imminent sense of doom, and to where I just knew something bad was going to happen to me, and these physiological symptoms getting much worse. I went to my very last operation, which was about 2 weeks, and when I came back from that, I couldn't remember almost the whole. It was like I woke up out of a dream, like everything was a fog, and I realized that I didn't only put myself in danger, but I put other people in danger as well, and so I had to say something. And just that I got feared, I was brought home. I sat before a clinical psychologist with my wife next to me, and a doctor said I was diagnosed with severe chronic PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I didn't even know what it was. I just knew in this moment in time in my life, I was dealing with two very real things. One is I was completely ashamed. I felt like I failed at the most important job I could ever have in my life. I worked my whole life to make it to this job. I had the opportunity to do it, and I failed. I failed my teammates. It was like if I was a football player and made it all the way to NFL like Ryan Leaf. Like, I made it to the Super Bowl, which I never would because I'm 5'3", right? But you get the point, right? I made it to the pinnacle, and I failed. I was so ashamed. On top of that, the level of panic I was in, the level of distress it's almost indescribable. Like, the only way I could put it into words is if you were like in a swimming pool and your ankle was handcuffed to the drain and you were drowning, and you like, how desperate would you be for like a breath of air? You're trying to just get one breath of air. That state of panic, but you never drown, you never die. It's 24/7. That's the level of panic that I was in, and I couldn't escape it. I didn't want to kill myself at that time, but I wanted to die because I couldn't make this stop. The medicine they gave me made me feel worse, and so I was trying to find something to do to engage in life again, and my wife and my counselor talked me into getting on those mats to do wrestling and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Not for a new thing. This is something, I'd say I did it since I was little, but I'm still little, right? I did it since I was 5 years old. I've been doing this my whole life. And I was already a professional MMA fighter, so when I got on those mats for the first time, it was like I found a cure. You can't think about you can't think about Afghanistan and do jiu-jitsu or your buddy's going to beat you up. You have to be focused. And, and I still think it's good for me. I still do it to this day. Ministry, especially ministering to veterans, is very hard and very stressful. And so when I have a bad day, I go to the gym and I find like some 20-year-old stud and I choke him out. Like, it's really easy. Yeah. It's really easy to share the gospel when someone's about to die. You could, but I loved jiu-jitsu, and it was good for me at the time, but I abused it. You could have a medicine for being sick, and you could abuse that medicine, right? And that's what I did with jiu-jitsu. Some people climb in a bottle of alcohol. Some people abuse pills. I abuse this. And I put so much energy and effort into it, trying to hide from this thing that I was running from, this PTSD and all these problems in my life, that I had a lot of success. I won a world title belt. I fought on all the big shows. I fought on pay-per-view and Showtime and MTV, and I made it 18-2 as a professional MMA fighter. I was ranked number 6 in the world I was the number 6 professional fighter in the world as flyweight. So I made it to the top. And in addition, my school, I owned a business, a martial arts school. I had like 1,000 students in it. So we were making money. I was having professional success. But meanwhile, while my professional career was going up, I was still in a downward spiral. My home was still a terrible place to be for my wife and children. I was still tormenting them. My PTSD, I was still having panic attacks. Some nights, I don't even know how I functioned as an athlete, because some nights I didn't even want to go to sleep because I was scared to close my eyes. And my marriage was falling apart. Many nights, I'd sleep in a friend's house or in my kid's bedroom. Or I'd say the loneliest place my wife and I would say we've ever been is separate in our bed with our backs turned towards each other in a dead marriage. We thought our marriage was over. And it didn't take long for me to walk out of our marriage into relationships with other women in a full-blown affair. I didn't even really care. I remember sitting my wife and children down and telling them we were getting divorced and that it was going to be better. I didn't have to hear fighting anymore. You get 2 Christmases. Like everything we try to sell, the situations to justify our actions. It wasn't going to get better. My family was devastated. We did it anyway. We sold our home, filed for divorce, and signed 2 separate leases for 12 months on apartments. My wife and I had 2 very different reactions. My wife went into a church, and she began to pray for me. Of course, I've asked her since, how can you pray for me when I was doing this to you? And she said she would pray, God, let me see Chad the way you see Chad. Let me love Chad the way you love Chad. God, let me forgive Chad the way you forgave Chad. That's what she would do, would pray for me when I was doing this. Meanwhile, I'm bachelor pad. Within a day, my apartment's decked out. I got a big fight on Showtime coming up. And I remember doing this fight, Toyota Center, really big, high-profile fight. This was my Rocky fight. I've won, out of my 18 wins, I have 17 submissions, 1 decision. This was my 1 decision. I'm in the middle of the Toyota Center in front of 10,000 people. And me and Roberto De Leon, we're knocking each other down. We knocked each other down each and every round. It was a battle. I remember getting to the end of the fight, and the referee is standing there waiting for the judges, and I'm like, oh my, I can't even remember the fight. I'm like, what just happened? Like, who's going to win? And my hand gets raised, and 10,000 people were in there cheering. And I remember the weight coming off, like the pressure of fighting coming off. And in this moment, my wife, I'm thinking, of all these 10,000 people here, my wife isn't here. She'd always been there before. She was my cheerleader before, and she wasn't there in that moment. And that led me to think, like, I'm in here fighting for the stupid win on my record. But when it comes to my family, why am I not fighting for that? And so I went back to my apartment by myself. Yeah. We could all probably relate to that in our jobs or whatever. But I went back to my apartment by myself that night. My mind's spinning, and I'm thinking, because you can't go to sleep after a fight, my mind's spinning, and I'm thinking, all these people I blamed in my life, my father, the military, and my wife are never understanding. Like, I'm the common denominator. The problem's me. And this thought came over me. My family might be sad without me, but they're going to be better off. Think about that. My family might be sad without me, but they're going to be better off. If you don't know, that same hopeless thought finds a home in the hearts of 22 veterans every single day. And beyond the veteran community, many people in our nation today at the highest level of suicide ever in our country. Maybe my family, maybe my loved ones, maybe my friends will be sad without me, but they're going to be better off. And so I made a decision that was going to take my life. It wasn't like a plea for help. I wasn't telling people or looking for attention. I was keeping it to myself, in my own little silo. That was going to take my life, and I was convinced I was going to do it. I would sit in my closet with my pistol. I had a Glock 22 pistol. I put my family's pictures on the floor, and I'd sit over them. And I put that pistol to my mouth. I press it to my head. I try to build up the courage to cross that line. I know what guns could do. I've seen what guns could do. So I knew where that line to cross was. And I try to build up the courage to cross that line and pull that trigger. And I don't know to this day if I had the courage to do it or not, because I didn't. But the one thing I could tell you is this. Every time I'd put that pistol to my head and press it to my head, I would think about who was going to find me. And the only person that had a key to my apartment besides me was my son Hunter, the one that's in Afghanistan. And I couldn't allow my son to find me that way, or even open the door to do that. But even though that made me pump the brakes, I still try to build up the next day to do that. And there was this one morning, I was in that closet, and I heard a knock on my door, and I didn't answer it. And then I heard my wife announce herself. When I heard her voice, I don't know why I did this, because she would have never went in my closet and found it. But when I heard her voice, I hid that pistol under a blanket. I was ashamed. And I went to answer her door, and we got in this argument. And in this argument, she asked me a question that radically changed my life. She asked me how I could do everything I did in the Marine Corps, become a recon Marine, do these deployments, how I could do everything I did as a fighter, like cutting weight, the massive weight cuts I do, and training for these fights, the amount of discipline it took to do all these professional things in my life. She's like, how could you do all of those things, and when it comes to your family, you'll quit? Now, I don't know about you, man, but there's no more soul-cutting word to me than to be called a quitter. And she was absolutely right. I've been successful at professional things, but when it came to the most important things, being a husband, being a father, being that young 17-year-old kid that raised his hand and said, I want to do something important with his life, I quit on all those things, including my own will to live. And I made a radical decision at that moment. I was going to turn it around. Had nothing to do with God. But I did know that I couldn't do it alone, and I couldn't do it with the people I'd surrounded myself by. I had surrounded myself by people that told me everything I wanted to hear, not what I needed to hear. I had no accountability in my life, and there's no more dangerous place on the planet to be. More dangerous than Afghanistan than to be a man in this world with no accountability. And I recognized that. I had to have accountability in my life. And this man named Steve Toth from a local church was on call. My wife called to ask if a man would meet with me. And I met him at a Starbucks coffee shop. And I remember sitting across from him. I never met him before. But I was going to present to him the perfect plan to fix my life because I didn't really need his help. I just needed him to tell my wife I was working on it, right? And I slid this paper over to him and told him this is my plan. And he put his hand on that paper and slid it back over to me without even reading it. And he told me I was going to fail. I remember being so offended. I'm like, who is this jerk? Like, read this thing. And he tapped on that paper and he said this. He said, if this thing doesn't have anything to do with your relationship with God, I'm not going to waste your time, and I'm not going to let you waste mine. Guys, I had tried everything. I I had tried the pills. I'd been medicated. I tried the counseling. I tried the MMA and Jiu Jitsu. I had professional success. Some of those things were good, but none of those things changed my situation. We have a saying at our ministry, if what you're doing isn't working, then why not try something different? Right? If what you're doing in your life isn't working, why not try something different? Everything I tried didn't work. It was time for me to try something different. And so I trusted this man, Steve. I surrendered my life to Christ. And I can tell you this, while the pills, while the counseling, while all those things didn't work for me, when I simply made the choice to step off that X in my life and step into the very life God created me to live in a relationship with him, my life was radically changed. What I discovered over the next year, because beyond that decision, Steve mentored me for a year. What I discovered was all these things that happened to me, as bad as some of those things may have been, from my childhood, from Afghanistan, losing buddies, all those things didn't lead me to be in that closet with a pistol in my hand. What led me there were the choices I made in response to those things. And I never lost the ability to choose differently. And as cliche as it may sound, I came to this realization that I didn't have to let my past define my future. I could choose something different moving forward. And I did. In that decision to choose the life that God created me to live and systematically and intentionally align my life to that, I found restoration in my marriage, in my family, in my own brokenness. By the way, we've been married going on 25 years now. We found, Kathy, I'm so blessed. Found that restoration. I found hope for the first time in a long time. And I found what I think I sought my whole life, and that's purpose. We were created to have purpose. When we feel like we don't have purpose anymore, that's when we wither up and die. Why do 22 veterans take their life every day? Not because of what they've seen or experienced. So sure, those things bother them, but the reason they don't want to live anymore is because they feel they don't have any purpose anymore. We were created to have purpose. Mark Twain says it like this: the two most important days in a person's life are the day that they're born and the day they find out why. Right? When Steve Toth introduced me to a relationship with Christ and the life that I feel I was created to live, I found out the why, and a purpose was lit underneath me again. And I tell you, it's that purpose is the reason I'm here today, to share with you the story of Christ in my life and the life and purpose that God has for each of us. And that burden fell so hard on my heart to realize that the things I struggle with, I was not alone in. And I think Stu Weber says it something like this: whatever's burning in our soul is somewhere in the chest of every man we know. That I wasn't alone, that other people had struggled with this as well, because when I was going through this, I felt all alone. I was like if I was dying of cancer and Steve Toth gave me the cure. I didn't want to share it. I felt obligated to share it. And I set forth, if I could pay it forward to one other person, we started the Mighty Oaks Foundation. And I tell you, I wasn't qualified to do it at the time. We wasn't ready. My family was still bleeding. But we just felt obedient to that burden and call God put in our hearts. And I'm so thankful that Kathy and I were, because it's been so amazing the amount of our team, this incredible team that's come around. I've been able to speak to over 100,000 active duty warriors on military bases around the world and share this message. Marine Corps lets me go to Marine Corps boot camp and speak to these brand new kids before they ever even step forth on a battlefield, to tell them that they don't have to choose between their masculinity and Christianity. They could be men of God and be warriors on the battlefield. We have these incredible programs. We do 30 camps a year where we bring warriors for free on active duty in the veteran community to understand this truth as well. And I'm here to tell you today that you don't have to be a military veteran to experience the life and promise that God has for you. That's the promise for all of us. There's a million ways in this world that you could be hurt, that you could get off track, but there's only one way in this world that you'll ever find healing, restoration, and purpose, and that's through a relationship with Jesus Christ. Man, life is hard, guys. Life is hard, and you're going to find yourself on X from time to time in your life. And when you do, remember that promise from Jeremiah 29:11. And I just pray that it'll give you the very strength and faith you need to be able to step off the X's in your life and the very lives that you're created to live. Can I pray with you? Lord, I just thank you so much for these men, that they would come here today and just step away from anything else they could be doing on a Saturday. There's so many men, millions of men in the proximity of this area, Lord. But these men that are here today chose to be intentional and come here to have an encounter with you so that you will guide their hearts to align their lives with the very lives you created them to live, Lord. Not just because you created them, Lord, but because you created them with a plan and purpose, Lord. And I pray that each man here will find his plan and purpose today through encountering a relationship with you. I thank you for being here, Lord. I thank you for men like Frank that have put this together. and this church that allow us to be here today and gather, Lord. I just thank you for this opportunity. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you guys so much. God bless you. Thank you.